and to hear someone out, there's something to be. He said, just listen. This last week's Torah portion. Moses says is reviewing to the Jewish people what their how they came into the desert and some of the things. I mean, the whole book, the fifth book of the Torah, is all a review of their experience together. But he talks about how God told him to create a system of justice and really advisors also. So you assume that people came not only to ask questions about what they're allowed to do on Shabbat, but also to ask for advice in life, because Torah is about life. It's not just a bunch of laws. So, and then it says that if there's something very difficult, you could bring it to me, because he had a whole tiered system of different people who were deemed able enough, like I guess local rabbis at the time, to be able to deal with specific issues, people's issues. And then it's something difficult, you bring it to me and I will listen. It doesn't say I will solve it. It doesn't say I will answer. It says I will listen. And some commentaries put there, say that, there are some things that are so difficult. And Moses is saying, there's no response to be given sometimes, but my response will be that I will actually hear you. And that may be sometimes the greatest gift we can give to someone. Because once you start speaking, then there is a very fine line between starting to almost like justify it or to diminish the pain, and that's terrible. That's barbaric. And what you refer to, Roberta, and that's what I was thinking is when you brought this up. When we moved out here, we moved out in 1993. So when we came out here, one of the things that we used to do is, good morning, Laurie. We would
good morning.
We would try to bring out different speakers. There was a way to smoke out Jews. So 12 people came, that was great, and then we had like 12 new people. It wasn't really 12 people. It could have been 6 couples, but at least now we had people to focus on and bring them a Chal for Shabbos. They had no idea what they were walking into, because we had like no one to talk to. So we brought a bunch of different speakers. One guy, and we would rent the Liberty Corner Firehouse, and we brought a professor from University of North Carolina, I believe. It was North Carolina. I believe it was University of North Carolina. His name was George Schlesinger, Professor George Schlesinger, and he was not a professor of philosophy. I forgot what it was, but he was not a professor of philosophy, but he was knowledgeable in philosophy. That's why, and he had a reputation for that. And that's why I took him. We brought him out here. He was, I believe, observant. He wasn't a Hasidic Jew. He didn't, he looked very normal. But he came to our condo in Spring Ridge, and we had dinner first. And he clearly knew Torah sources and non-Torah sources. And we were what we brought him out to speak about was theodicy, which is God and evil, or God and suffering. So as we're sitting at dinner in Spring Ridge, and I'm, I don't know, 25 years old, and I wanted to learn. Still want to learn, but I wanted to hear from him, and I was asking him questions, especially since he was familiar with some of the Torah sources. And he said, "Here's the bottom line: when it comes to God and suffering, the answers that make you feel good in the deeper analysis don't really make sense, and the answers that make sense are not going to make you feel good." So what he was saying was that it's really an untenable situation, that it's nothing, you're not going to come up with any perfect answers. And I think it's fair to say that really, in many ways, the most we can give someone is, that hug, the feeling of being embraced, and the empathy. And I think that's one of the reasons that when visiting a shiva, God forbid someone loses a close relative and they're sitting in mourning, Jewish law tells us that those visiting, that actually you're not supposed to say anything until the mourner speaks to us and wants to speak. And I think that one of the lessons there is that it's an uncomfortable situation. Uncomfortable situations sometimes bring people to say some things that they don't mean it insensitively, but they come out not so smart. And I've seen it. There's no question that happens. And he said that what Jewish law, I think, is telling us is the main thing is you be there. You came out to show you care. Whatever you say is not going to bring back the person. And it's not likely that you're going to be able to come up with something that's going to soften the blow. So the other option is it'll be nothing, or it could actually be touch a raw nerve. So when I do agree with you, Roberta, that when JLI, they're trying to do their job and they do a great job at it. But sometimes when it comes to suffering, especially if someone someone could be brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and a Torah scholar. But if their job is in what I'm going to call an ivory tower of ideas, Torah ideas, then they're going to be missing a certain wisdom that comes from engaging real life on the ground and on Main Street. And therefore, when it comes to the laws of mourning, or the ideas of the Torah guidance in this sector, I have learned so much, invaluably much, from my life, just from having to deal with people on the ground and sensing how they feel, and sensing, and being able to see what can really work. And it's humbling, just take an idea and throw it out there, and all of a sudden people are going to buy it, not intelligent people, and it may not be you may be taking it in a more simplistic sense, because it has to get more nuanced when it comes to human beings, because human beings are more complex than a textbook. So I do understand what you're asking, what you're saying. I share what you're saying, and I must say that there are times, not only with this one, where I've been tempted to say, because I didn't have time to come up with my own stuff for a Sunday morning, just say we're not meeting this Sunday, because I wasn't confident in how the material was going to be, the material given to us in the textbook, how it was going to be received, because there's only so much you could stray from. When things are in a textbook, there's only so much you can go away from it. So it's the only things I want people to have an opportunity to study Torah on a Sunday morning. So I try not to cancel it, but I do get what you're saying, and I have actually conveyed that gently to people at the helm of JLI, together with a lot of compliments. Just hang on.
Well, I think you did a great job sharing it. So in all fairness, everybody in the class appeared to be really very receptive. So all went well.
Thank you. All right. So now we're going to get back to the Yom Kippur service in the temple. And it's page 130. And Laurie, you had asked a couple of weeks ago for more of an exploration of the incense, if I remember correctly. That's what I'm
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for remembering that.
I'm glad you're here. I was just waiting to see if it comes. It's not fully the way it is, but I think we'll talk about it here anyway. At least we're gonna have an opening for it. Okay. So on page 12, I'm sorry, verse 12. It says like this. This is, we had spoken about the high priest going in. We spoke with the two goats extensively last week. Then it says, must ascend to the outer altar. Now, in the temple, I want to just give a few words of preface. We'll go through this and we can talk a little more. That's what I think the best way to do it is. In the temple, when one came into the tabernacle or the temple, there was, when one came in, there was a very large altar, which was big structure with a ramp going up. It was not a table. It was a big structure. And there were fires burning there, and that's where the offerings were brought. And the offerings, there were at least 2 offerings a day, morning to open up the day on the late afternoon. But then there was people's individual offerings, community offerings. There was always something. That is what is known as the copper altar or the outer altar, because if the Holy of Holies and the inner sanctuary is the inner, that's what's called the soul of the tabernacle or of the temple. So the entryway, the areas when you come in, you're going from the outside in. So one of the first things you'd come up on, and certainly in the tabernacle, was this large altar. And when we speak about different offerings that were brought through, and the Torah certainly has those, that is generally speaking on the outer altar. Now, one of them be able to go into well, not necessarily one, but people could go in, the Kohen, whatever, would go into a more inner area, and that's where the great the menorah was, the candelabrum. There was tables with shobrets, challahs. That was there throughout the week, and they were changed every week, and they were miraculously remained fresh. And there was another altar, a smaller altar, a golden altar. And that altar was the altar of the incense, because incense was also brought every day. Now, the primary fire, so to speak, the altar central was the outer altar. So they would be, when they wanted to, in the morning, when they wanted to bring incense on the inner altar, what they would do is they'd take coals from the outer altar, because that's where they all were, and they would put it on the inner altar, and then put it together with the herbs for the incense. So that's a general day. But here we say like this: 12. Must then descend the outer altar, because he brought these offerings, animal offerings, and then take a pan full of burning coals from upon the altar. Okay, he's taking a pan with coals from the outer altar. If they would do that every day, as I said, if they were going to burn the incense on the inner altar, specifically from the side of the altar that is before God, which means the west side. The west side was, if you're going outside into the temple, you're going from east to west. And the west side, in a spoon containing 2 handfuls, an amount equal to 3 mana, which is 2.4 kilograms or 5.28 pounds of the same incense that is used daily, but that has been reground feast on this day, so it'd be extra fine. So it always had to be what's called fine. The incense was always finely ground, and because of the way the Torah writes it here, we say in Kippur it had to be extra fine. In other words, they would put it back into the grinder. They would take stuff that had already been ground and put it back into the grinder. So now it's extra fine incense, and you have a pan of coals, and then bring the pan and the spoon of incense into the Holy of Holies beyond the curtain. Now here, usually during on your average Tuesday morning, they would bring that not to the Holy of Holies, but what's an area called the Holy, where there was this inner and golden altar of incense, and they would burn it there. But the Holy of Holies was really only once a year. Now it's that once a year, it's in Kippur. So to bring the pan and the spoon of incense to the Holy of Holies beyond the curtain. Once inside, you must place the pan on the floor in front of the ark in the space between its poles. Okay. So because there were these poles attached to the ark for carrying, those never left the ark. So we put it in front of the ark. Must then place the incense upon the fire burning in the pan before God in front of the ark, so that the cloud formed by the smoking incense envelop the ark cover that is above the tablets of the testimony. So now he's put the pan with burning coals on the floor. Then he puts, and it's burning coals. So now he puts incense on the fire, and that would create a cloud of smoke. And there was, and also there was 11 different types of herbs that went into this, and there was something that put in, which, and we're not sure exactly what it was, but it would cause the smoke, I guess, increase the smoke, but it made it go upwards. So now there's smoke rising up. All smoke goes upwards, but the idea was it was more straight. Okay, so that the cloud formed by the smoking incense enveloped the ark cover that is above the tablets of the testimony. So there was an ark cover, and on top of the ark, part of the ark cover was these golden cherubim. So, but in the box that the ark cover is covering is where the Ten Commandments are that Moses gave us. He must perform this rite precisely according to his instructions in order that he not die. For deviating from the prescribed procedure is a capital offense. Burning incense inside the Holy of Holies atones for the sin of tail bearing. Okay, so this is kind of like an aside, you think. So there are certain things, I think last week we also mentioned a few things that, that this atones for that and that atones for that. I think when you think about Yom Kippur, I think about it's about the relationship between us and God, saying like I'm sorry, and it's much more, it's a broader thing. Is I've neglected you, I've neglected our relationship, and I'm recommitting to our relationship. That's true, and that's important. I think that one of the things that the rabbis that the Talmud wanted to teach us is that we shouldn't leave it in generalities. We should get to details, and we should anchor it in details. So therefore, some of the things that came up, it's like for tail bearing. What if I didn't do tail bearing this year? What does that have to do with me? The idea is that we want that there would be certain issues, behavioral issues that were specifically reflected by the service, and that would be something where we want to be able to use that as a portal into our practically applying our recommitment to honoring our relationship with God and honoring our own existence by living correctly. And in this case, we say that with the incense in the Holy of Holies, there was a focus on tail bearing. Now, tail bearing in general, the Talmud tells us no one really escapes that, even if they're really careful. There's insinuations, a look at the eye. Tail bearing isn't only what we're saying to someone else. It can be much more subtle, and what's called the dust of lashon hara, gossip, or tail bearing, and therefore that this is something, a place to anchor it, but it's not exclusively this. It's the one day a year. It's Yom Kippur. So the high priest and the Holy of Holies with the incense. It addresses everything. It's a time to address everything. But they give and we've had it before, and we'll have it again. That there are certain specifics which may feel like too specific, but even in our service on Yom Kippur, where we're saying things and some of them feel like they apply, some of them feel like they don't apply. But I guess try to keep it to anchor in specifics, because that will make it real. Says he must then leave the Holy of Holies to get the bull's blood, re-enter the Holy of Holies, then facing the ark, take some of the bull's blood and sprinkle it once on the ground with his index finger facing upward toward the eastern side of the ark cover. He must then sprinkle some of the blood with his index finger facing downward 7 times in front of the ark cover. Okay. Must then leave the Holy of Holies. This was a big deal that he's in the Holy of Holies. Slaughter the he-goat that was designated as the people's sin offering, because remember, he said there were 2 goats, one of them is an offering, and bring his blood into the Holy of Holies beyond the curtain. And then do with its blood as he had done with the bull's blood, and sprinkle it once upward toward the ark cover and 7 times downward toward the ark cover. Okay. So before we go further, let's just talk a little bit about the incense, because it is a big deal on every day. And the Torah, the Torah is is giving really an unmistakable message, and it's not a subtle message, that the Ketoret, the incense, was an arena of profoundly meaningful spiritual exercises. The incense had an especially hallowed place. So we did it every day. And then there's the one day a year, and we're going to the Holy of Holies. Incense is the focus. So what was the incense? First of all, incense, there are a few things to consider. The very idea, and we've had this, we started the book of Leviticus, the very idea of offerings as presented by the Torah and presented as something very specially pleasing to God. That's the language. So it doesn't, I assume that giving charity is pleasing to God. I assume that lighting Shabbos candles is pleasing to God. I mean, there's so many things. Doing the right thing is pleasing to God. There was something special about this that is singled out as being pleasing to God. And the language that the Torah uses is that it was a pleasing fragrance to God, as though God has olfactory senses, that there's something, the obviously God doesn't smell like we smell, but the anthropomorphism being used is for smell. And I believe we discussed it a bit months ago when we first started or whenever, maybe over a year ago, I don't remember when it was, when we started this book of the Torah, which got us into this topic of offerings. The idea of smell in the human condition has a distinct place. Let's put it that way. First of all, when God when the Torah describes how God created humanity, so God creates the first human being, Adam, A-D-A-M, and it says that God creates a body from the earth, forms in other words, a physical form. And then the language of the Torah, the scripture, is that God blew a living soul into Adam's nostrils. In other words, the soul entry point was the nostrils. When in these recent Torah portions, when we spoke about Aaron's two sons who were such great people and they passed away, also in the Holy of Holies, they're bringing the incense, and it says they died, and we spoke about how they died, but it says like two things of fire came into and out of their nostrils. And so the Torah doesn't say that clearly, but from the Torah's description, that's the way the Talmud frames it. What does it mean? It's through the nostrils on the way in, it's through the nostrils on the way out. It doesn't mean that spatially much. It means that the breath, breathing, is the stuff of life. Okay, so we do know that. There's another angle, is that even within the human condition, if someone is in a swoon and they can't be woken up, at least for many, many centuries, what we do is put something like smelling salts under their nose, and somehow that was able to jolt their consciousness when pouring cold water on them and calling their name and jostling them around didn't get them up. There's something to the depth of the sense of smell. Some commentaries point out that with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, when there was this original pollution to the human condition, they heard from the snake. They responded And so they heard, and then they were able to, they saw the tree of life and the fruits, and then they felt it, and then they ate it. So 4 out of the 5 senses were corrupted in that element, and that's what they passed on to their kids. The only sense that was not part of that original tragic episode was smell. So there is this idea that both within the human and even within the divine, something that can really strike us deep. That's the sense of smell. And even to use the Talmudic language in the law, it says we have there's the final psalm in the book of Psalms, which is in our daily prayers, says that the soul praises God. So the soul, and in the Talmud they say we have the soul is pointing to praise God. It says that we have the soul should be blessing God for a benefit. What's the benefit? And the language of the Talmud is, what is something where the soul benefits, but not the body? It's a fragrance. That's what it's talking about. Why we make a blessing on fragrance, even though we make a blessing on benefits. You ate something that's tangible. A fragrance is not tangible. It's not a tangible benefit, and it comes and goes. But that's something. It may not be a tangible one, but it's a soul benefit. So there's something to be strong to be said about the idea of smell. And as we say, even the offerings, say its bottom line was a pleasing smell to God. In other words, the ones on the outer, the animal offerings, whatever was being burned on the altar. So now that's something we see, and there is, even though the offerings there was a lot going to the offerings, and the smell seems kind of a byproduct. And if the Torah didn't say it's pleasing to God, we probably wouldn't guess so. But then there's something which itself in the human condition was straight up this idea of a beautiful smell. And the wonderful smell of the incense. Now, something of an aside in the sense that it's in the topic of the incense, not exactly where I'm going, but I think it's helpful for us to, it's a good idea, an inspiring thought for us to understand, is that there were 11 different, I think I mentioned 11 different types of herbs, or ingredients that went into the ketoret, that's the Hebrew word for incense. And one of them, which is called chelbana in Hebrew, and is translated sometimes as galbanum. I've seen Maimonides translated into a modern, into the contemporary name for it in his day, and it's been called, I think, Storax. Sounds like a detergent, but it's something. I don't know if we know what it is, but certainly in Israel there are think tanks trying to recreate all of this, and that has a foul smell, and it's a pungent foul smell. And the Talmud says a beautiful thought. It says that whenever it says a fast day, but it doesn't mean only fast day. What was a fast day? A fast day was the idea of getting together to turn to God and say, God, please help us out. There's a time of raw emotion pouring out to God. And the idea was, it's a fast day. People used to call fast days. Today, fast days it's Tisha B'Av, it's from Kippur, whatever it is. It's not something that it doesn't even have him feel conducive to pouring out your heart because you're hungry. But the idea Talmudically is that it's a time of passionate imploring God. So he said there's a fast day or a fast day get together of imploring God is not complete unless there are people there who are, let's call it, less than perfect in their observance, even significantly less than perfect. And said that without that, the Galbanum showed us in order to have this pleasing fragrance for God, you have to have this in it. It doesn't smell good. And sometimes our behaviors don't smell good. And what the Talmud says is that what it did was the pungency, given the other 10 sweet smelling or scented, fragrant herbs and ingredients, the pungency just it increased those. It turbocharged the good. So and there are languages that the incense itself teaches us that in order for us to be as a community, to really to be wholesome and properly positioned to be able to approach God with a full heart, we can't just be in a position where we're gathering like-minded or the behaviorally speaking the cream of the crop. It's everybody, and if someone feels excluded, it's not going to be so sweet smelling. We need to be able to engage even the less likely participants. Now, having said that, so what's the Torah? The Torah was a straight up idea of sweet smelling. So Maimonides writes that the reason for the Torah, the Maimonides, well, let me backtrack that. Maimonides was a great rabbi, obviously a great believer, a great theologian, and maybe he's probably best known for his book of laws. He also wrote a book of philosophy called Guide for the Perplexed, where he was trying to he brings Judaism down to a very rational level for those who are struggling with faith, but just to be able to feel comfortable with Judaism and the rational side of things. So therefore, he rationalizes a number of things in Torah in a way which it's kind of hard to believe or hard to accept. It's something that we wouldn't expect from a believing rabbi, the way he rationalizes sometimes. And there's plenty of speculation about it, but you can pretty much see that it's not that he was writing his personal beliefs in Guide for the Perplexed, but he was putting out there acceptable explanations for someone who didn't want to take too far a step of faith. So one of the things he writes about the incense is that we had offerings going on in the great altar, the outer altar, the copper altar. It didn't smell great. Animals and their flesh being burned, and their intestines. It wasn't a pretty scene, and it wasn't a particularly sweet smelling scene. So he says that the incense is something to kind of mask the bad odors, so that people in a temple, at least it smelled good. It's that's fair. It's Maimonides, and it is what it is. But even his contemporaries wrote that there's no way he saw that as the actual significance in the Ketoret, the incense, especially since we have proof that he also studied Kabbalistic things, and that the incense is so deeply respected. So think about it this way. I spoke before about the power of smell. One of the things that the power of smell is, on the one hand, it's not concrete. It's not tangible. There are things in life that are not tangible. And sometimes that can be an intuition. Sometimes that's even greater. So sometimes we say about something that doesn't pass the sniff test. What does that mean? Even if I can't exactly explain to you in an equation why something is wrong, it doesn't smell right. Or it does smell right. So it feels right. It smells right. Now, if I can't explain it, I can explain it. You know, actually, just to jump in my head, I don't know, it maybe pushing it a little bit, but last week, not this Sunday, the Sunday before, one of our rabbis in New Jersey, in the Chabad houses, Saturday night, he wasn't feeling well. He's a guy who's 52, 53. And one would think in pretty good shape, certainly looks like he's okay. And he didn't feel good. And it felt cardiac. And they went to Hackensack Hospital. And it was a Saturday night, and they gave him stress test, and they looked at him, and they brought in, and the doctor who knows him came in to see him also, and all the tests were coming up negative. So they said, we're going to admit you, and then tomorrow morning we're going to we'll go for further testing. And the doctor, the cardiologist who was there, and perhaps because maybe he knows him, he said, something's not right. I can't tell you what it is. Something's not right. So I want to send you for a CAT scan. A CAT scan, or the cardiac thing, it doesn't maybe it's nothing. You go up, you go to sleep. I want to send you for a CAT scan. And the CAT scan showed that he was very, very, very close to an aneurysm. So they rushed him into the operating room, and his wife told me, and the doctor said the aorta was like less than paper thin, and probably wouldn't have made it till morning. So it's a divine blessing. But you see, what a doctor, someone who knows their field, and I don't know this guy, but someone who knows their field, it's not only what they can put into an equation, it's something, and the language we use doesn't smell right, or it does smell right. This is something, why do we use that language? Because it's something that it's not tangible, but there's a sense there. I can sense it. And maybe it's a little elusive, like a fragrance. I guess that's probably how it got into the English language, but it certainly is in the Yiddish language, and it's in the English language. So if you take the offerings and the animal offerings that were put on the outer altar, and they say that they represent our animal. In other words, the nuts and bolts of our own. And what's an animal? An animal's beautiful. An animal's wonderful. An animal's sweet. But animals is ultimately they're a reflexive human being, and an animal it does what it wants. It may want something good, but it does what it wants. An animal doesn't have the capacity for self-awareness, and an animal doesn't have the capacity to say, I'm not going to pee in the corner because the householders here are wonderful people, and they just shampoo the carpet. They can't do that. You have to teach it not to pee in the corner. Doesn't mean it's a bad animal. It just does what it does. And then you teach it not to do that. How do you teach it? By swatting it on a tush a little bit, whatever, however animal training goes on. So our animals it's really the self part. It's this is what I want. Okay, I want a yogurt. Maybe I want good stuff. Wanting is part of being alive, but when it takes us over our lives and it's all about what we want, that's where things can go off the rails. So the idea of bringing our animal as an offering, it wasn't just about something burning on top of an altar. It was really it was an expression, an external expression of a spiritual exercise of us bringing up our animal of life, because we all have an animal, and bringing it, having it devoured in a godly flame, so to speak. But once that was taken care of, and that's the devoured, said they can be left over in the language that's found in Jewish thought and Jewish spirituality. There's still the fragrance. It's not necessarily what we're doing, but the fragrance we bring to it. And maybe someone can't point to say, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. We have all the plausible deniability, but it doesn't smell right. So that's a deeper, much more subtle problem, but it has to be addressed. So for our own selves and our own cleansing. So while the outer altar addressed the body of our behaviors, the incense every day, which was on the inner altar, addressed more the inner levels of our personality. It wasn't only what I did, what I didn't do, the easily identifiable things. It was a more subtle approach, and that smell, so to speak, that was the incense helped to be able to dispel that, and that was on a regular day. The incense on Yom Kippur kicked it up a lot, because now it was not only on the inner altar. He brought it into the Holy of Holies. And Yom Kippur wasn't a day about we dealt with the body of our problems and even the fragrance of our problems. So what was this incense inner this service going on inside the Holy of Holies by the Ark? So there's language in the Zohar and in Kabbalah and Talmud also, that the word for, in Aramaic, the word for incense, ketoret, in the Aramaic, it means a bond. So if you can hear just the language, when the Zohar says, I am bound in one bond with God, it's b'chad katira itkatana, and which sounds very much like ketoret, because it is the same word. So it was about the bond we have with God. That Yom Kippur, there's this oneness we have with God. So bringing the incense into the Holy of Holies was an exercise in finding our intimate oneness with God that we may not be conscious of. It's our deepest selves, because our deepest selves are always connected to God. We may not feel it. It may not be consciously experienced, but it's always there. So now, I brought my glasses here somewhere. We didn't. Okay. Yeah, right here. Can't see my glasses. I have my glasses. Okay. Bottom of 130. The Hasidic insights. It says you must place the incense. As has been noted previously, incense is offered up on the inner altar, right? So there was the golden altar next to the menorah and the showbreads, which parallels the inner dimension of the heart, meaning our divine soul, which is constantly bound towards the divine source and serves to reveal and intensify this bond. So this was an exercise on Yom Kippur in helping the entire Jewish people feel and exercise and intensify their fundamental core bond with God, oneness. In contrast, the sacrifices offered up on the outer altar are designed to elevate the outer dimension of the heart, our human, animal, soul, divinity, which is what I said before. In this context, the burning of the incense on Yom Kippur in the Holy of Holies, the innermost part of the sanctuary, more interior than even the inner altar, reflects the revelation on this day of the innermost dimension of the divine soul itself. So Yom Kippur was oneness. Oneness meaning our oneness, meaning God's oneness. When this aspect of the divine soul is revealed, our spiritual nature takes over our physicality, transforming us into quasi-angelic beings who have no need for food or drink. So the oneness, there's two legitimate ways to look at Yom Kippur. One is that we fast and we closet ourselves in prayer because we're trying to come to a sense of oneness. We're cutting out the distractions that come with material life. Another way, that's from the outside in, which is totally legitimate. That's for most of us. Another way is if one feels the oneness who has need for food and drink. I'm sure we've all had experiences where we're so engrossed in something that it really captures us. We're not thinking about food and drink. We're looking at we're engaged in something special. We have no food for it, need for food or drink. Thus, the various forms of affliction we are enjoined to observe on Yom Kippur, rather than punish us, are meant to express our metamorphosis into spiritual beings on this day. So instead of saying, which is what I would tell people all the time, that the reason we do these things on Yom Kippur is to try to strip ourselves of the normal distractions so that we can commit ourselves to God and find that oneness. You look the other way. If you have the oneness, so then this is just an expression of that. As Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev is quoted as saying regarding the injunctions to fast on Tisha B'Av, anniversary of this Thursday, anniversary of the destruction of the temple, and Yom Kippur. His quote, as it's come down to us, is: "There's no need for us to be commanded to fast on these days. For on Tisha B'Av, who can eat? You're experiencing the pain of millennia, and in Yom Kippur, who needs to eat? Because we're so wrapped up in the intimacy of our bond with God." Okay, so there are questions. Move to 131. So, verse 16 says, "He will thus effect atonement for any defilement of the holy premises and their sacrifices that might have been caused by any of the various states of ritual defilement, possibly carried by any of the Israelites when they entered these precincts or ate the sacrifices. This atonement will be effective both for the rebellious acts in this regard, meaning if they committed this intentionally, and for all their unintentional sins in this regard, meaning if they committed the sin after having forgotten that they were ritually defiled. The atonement for committing this sin unintentionally remains in effect until the transgressor becomes aware that he was ritually defiled when he committed the sin, at which point he must offer up a variable sin offering as described above. In order to atone for possible defilement of the candelabrum, the table of the showbreads, or the curtain caused by a ritually defiled person or entity having touched them, Aaron must also perform the same procedure on the tent of meeting, through which God dwells with the Israelites even while they're in their states of defilement. He must exit the Holy of Holies, and while standing in the outer sanctuary west of the inner altar and facing the curtain, he must sprinkle some of his bull's blood and some of the blood of the people's goat toward the curtain, each one once with his finger facing upward and 7 times with his finger facing downward." So I think that now we'll leave it over here because we're getting into, we're not going to have time to be able to deal with this next thing properly. So we'll leave it at verse 17. That's okay. Any questions?
I just wanted to thank you so much. The clarity you put on this was just something, no words. So thank you again.
All right, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
When the priest is sprinkling this blood in the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, and then he's not allowed back in again until next Yom Kippur. So the blood that's sprinkled in there, did it miraculously get cleaned for the next Yom Kippur, or was it accumulated over time?
It's first of all, he does. That's a great question. They're not. I don't have a cleaning crew coming in there.
Right.
My guess is that it accumulated over time. But it's that that may have to look if that's addressed. My feeling is that it accumulated.
Uh-huh. I was just wondering what the significance of that was. So, but thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Be well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great week, everyone, including Tesha B'Av.